Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar on recent updates handling supply chain and logistics efficiently during COVID-19 times. My name is Peter Deubelt, and I'm the Deputy Director General of the Indo-German Chamber of Commerce. A warm welcome also to the network of the Hamburg representation in India. Moin Moin. Today, we bring to you another webinar with an aim to address relevant issues and stay in close contact with our members and partners in these challenging times. Our German ambassador Lindner mentioned in an interview a couple of days ago that when you export a made in India car, it has products from 20 other countries. Today, most manufacturing companies have similar complex supply chains and therefore currently face huge disruptions. Our knowledge partners in today's webinar will give an overview of the supply chain impact on key industries and present measures and steps organizations can take to manage their logistics better in the time of crisis. It is a pleasure to introduce Unmesh Lohite, Principal of EAC International Consulting, and Vineet Martin, who is a Senior Consultant with EAC India. EAC has over 25 years of experience across all sectors and was one of the first management consultancies to specialize in Asia with strategy development and globalization solutions. I'm also very happy to introduce to you Vivek Arya, Managing Director of Rhenus Logistics India Private Limited. Vivek is a well-known figure in the Indian logistics industry and has over 30 years of relevant experience. He leads Rhenus India, which is part of the German Rhenus Group that achieves an annual turnover of 5.5 billion euro with some 33,000 employees. Before our speakers begin their sessions, we would like to run two polls with the audience. Slides will come up on your screen, and we kindly ask you to answer. Your feedback will set the tone for our speakers. I request Unmesh to start his presentation. Unmesh, please.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Deubelt. Good afternoon to all the participants. As Mr. Deubelt mentioned, we would be running a poll. This is to gain understanding on the participation from the various industry segments, what you see on your screen now. My name is Unmesh Lohite, and together with Vineet Martin, we will be presenting on impact on supply chain, representing EuroAsia Consulting. The speech will be first from Vineet Martin, followed by myself. I request for the poll, and after that, Vineet, if you could take over, please. Thank you.
I will request everyone to select one option, and we will be sharing the results of the poll on screen in about a minute.
Vineet, I think you can initiate.
The poll is still in progress. We have 74% of the audience who have already voted. We'll just launch the result in just a few more seconds. So here are the results of the first question.
Thanks for all the polls.
Vineet, are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Let's start.
I don't have presenter rights. Maybe Unmesh, you can share the presentation and we can take it from there.
Yeah. Sana, can you share the rights, please?
Yes.
Shall I put on the screen?
Yes, you can start with the presentation.
Yeah, perfect.
Vineet.
Yes. All right. Thank you for the introduction, Ms. Durbin. Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon, and thank you for joining this webinar. Okay, so the target, let's say, for the next 15 to 20 minutes or so is to take you through, number one, what you should expect while operating as COVID-19 situation continues in the background, and two, the critical factors you would need to consider from a supply chain perspective, considering the circumstances. Now, key questions, these are key questions we've been getting over the past few weeks from the industry stakeholders we focus on. I will first give an overview of the timeline we can expect for the impact on supply chain, since it's important from a planning perspective, and then we can deep dive into specific industries. Here, since I lead the automotive practice, I'll cover automotive industry and then hand it over to my colleague Unmesh, and he's the SEM expert, and he can throw light on key engineering industries and also to take you through mitigation opportunities. So, speaking of what to expect per se, let's look at where we were on the 22nd, just 2 days ago. And the best part about visualizing anything is that things get clear. Like you would see on this logarithmic graph, that despite the upward movement of the curve around April 6th, and since April 6th, you would notice until April 22nd, the lockdown has more or less helped in flattening the curve. And today we potentially stand at an R0 of 1.4. The rationale behind this was that we get prepared with respect to healthcare services infrastructure. I next want to draw your attention to the other part of this graph, which is although we have flattened the curve, can we stay on the same slide, Unmesh? I'll let you know about the slide numbers. Thank you. Now, what I was saying is the next part about this graph is that although we have flattened the curve, the number of infections is still increasing at about 1,000 confirmed cases a day, even if the cases is doubling at a limited 12 days. So going to the next slide, as I would question, great, we have flattened the curve, but when do we get rid of COVID-19? So here I have a timeline of medical solutions that we don't have as yet. since we are primarily dependent on curtailing as of now, screening, testing, contact tracing. These are not solutions to the problem, but solutions to curtailing the problem. The solutions are being developed. 66 programs are running globally, and these focus on 3 primary objectives. The number 1 block is basically talking about existing drugs that can be leveraged. You would have heard of drugs such as hydroxychloroquine or plasma treatment that exist for other conditions, and these need to be ascertained for COVID-19. The second block, there are 16 programs running for COVID-19 specific antivirals. And this is important. So considering both repurposed drugs and antibodies that you see, we are looking at commercialization by September 2020. And then, of course, you would have demand for mass production and distribution, which, of course, is an opportunity that would arise, especially for cold chain logistics service providers or even companies that focus on pharmaceutical drugs. This timeline is also applicable for vaccines, as you would see in the last block. But here, commercialization is expected only post-September 2021. The impact, let's start with a perspective on where we stand today. Today, 170 districts are under hotspot, are categorized as hotspots. These include major manufacturing hubs such as Guntur, Nellore in Andhra Pradesh, Pune, Ahmednagar in Maharashtra, Ahmedabad, Rajkot in Gujarat. Now, RBI data suggests that these 170 districts hold about 80% of the total credit outstanding of scheduled commercial banks. What I mean to say by that is that these manufacturing hubs, some of those also are key demand hubs as well. Moving on, the partial easing of the economy primarily resumes overall economic operations from 25% during lockdown to about 45% in this week and the next. Therefore, the impact on the economy in calendar year 2020 eventually depends on how COVID-19 spread and the solutions entailed in this year, leading up to Q3 of next year. And since we Indians love cricket, I'll use cricket as an analogy. This is not a T20 or a one-day game or a few month scenario. This is a test match, 5 days of batting, bowling, and fielding, or in other words, resilience, responsiveness, and reconfigurability or flexibility until September 2020 when we have commercialization of drugs, and even going up to 2021 if we need vaccines by then. So going to the next slide, the next question really arises, how do we do that? Let's start with the supply chain impact overview. I know all the SCM functions, be it demand planning, sourcing, production, they're all in red. And that's one of the key reasons why we are all here today. Knowing it's all red, and the key question is, how do we go beyond it? But before that, we will take you through 4 to 5 key industries over here, but I want to pause for a moment and look at the information block that's on the extreme right of this slide. We'll deep dive into each industry, but take a moment to realize that the information block is of high importance, especially in this scenario, and is a factor that is not negatively impacted. Amish, can we move to the next slide, please? Right. So starting with automotive, first and foremost, from a planning perspective, we can expect retail sales for OEMs taking prominence in the coming months instead of wholesale sales. And we already read in news that Suzuki has already commented on the fact that they would prefer production only once they can restart production on an everyday basis. So this could further lead to longer lead times since tier suppliers would need to find the right balance between delivery times and cash reserves. And therefore, from a planning perspective, for tier suppliers, you would need to consider planning for batch production instead of GIT or GIS that we are so used to as of now. And here it becomes all the more important to reduce your demand planning schedule from 30 to 45 days that suppliers currently follow to 15 to 20 days, which would not only enable strict cash conservation from inventory perspective, it would also help in managing production, which would need to adhere to strict production SOPs that would now include hygiene parameters as well. On the other hand, data is king, and now it becomes all the more important. The more you know, the more you can leverage. Please bring a CIO task force in play that collects, analyzes, and gives insights on the entire value chain planning from OEMs to suppliers, and end-to-end value chain coverage. Moving on to the next slide, we focus on sourcing. So here, you really need to negotiate single source contracts immediately and reach out to mega suppliers, since you can expect flexibility from them, especially due to their high fixed costs. So please make that call now. Resist panic buying. I know this would be the first thought that would come to mind, but midterm solutions such as contract manufacturing would be more viable solutions in the midterm. Finally, this goes without saying, hygiene and social distancing SOPs, especially the ones outlined by the Ministry of Home Affairs, it details out specific SOPs to be followed from a hygiene as well as social distancing point of view. These need to be implemented, including splitting of production volume over multiple shifts, and there shouldn't be any lax on these essential practices. So with that, I'll hand it over to Unmesh. He'll take you through the rest of the industries, and we'll take your questions once at the end of the session. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Vineet. Thanks for the introduction as well as automotive update. Moving further, our deep dives into the food or packaging machinery. Since it's an essential industry, the demand is expected to remain consistent, however, will be impacted with dependence on imports for sourcing, particularly for electronics, such as controllers or PLC. So the key focus will be on planning and information exchange or visibility to maintain operational efficiency, what we saw in the earlier block of overview of supply chain. However, considering bottlenecks in imports opens up opportunities for machinery or equipment players locally, particularly for packaging manufacturers or players with local value chain. So here the key mitigation or support measures for food packaging are really resourcing, strategic sourcing, as well as contract manufacturing similar to automotive from non-hotspots. Moving on to another critical industry, critical importance, pharma, in short to mid-term has high dependence on China for APIs and intermediates, for which government is really keen on localization here. Also, the government has clear emphasis on local production of antibiotics, penicillin, etc. As well as industry itself is experiencing increased exports demand, which should drive machinery demand as well. Similar story with chemical. It too has a high dependence on China in its case for intermediates like phenol acetones, wherein alternate or local sourcing needs to be explored as relevant from the industry. However, also considering manufacturers had to shut down during this lockdown period or reduce capacity, the industry is seeking essential status with its cross linkages to many essentials such as food, edible oils, drugs, fertilizers. So this is also a mitigation or support measure for chemical in particular. And also moving on to power equipment here, the dependence, although on imports, particularly China for renewables, particularly for solar panels, whereas for coal-based plants for say critical spares, the measures such as alternate sourcing or from local or other regions, since the local capacities are with limited capacities, these are the measures that can be mitigated. India also being a key exporting country in wind turbine gearboxes, the focus should be to position as alternate for China and mitigate production disruptions through export-focused manufacturing, through limited shift operations, dynamic production planning, and so on. So here the story is also of exports in power equipments. So we also have elaborated on other industries like consumer goods, as well as electronics and medical devices. but due to time constraints, and that's why we took the poll earlier, we will be focusing only on these industries, although the presentation is available for later circulation from IGCC. So I will further like to focus on the COVID impact and how the focus has been changed in SCM. So as we know, since the past, rightly, the focus of SCM parameters has been on optimization majorly, like costs, inventory, also from say the sourcing perspective, best cost country sourcing. If I summarize, focus on cost, quality, delivery, rightly so, we have gathered advantages from this. But however, going further, critical integration of information exchange and analytics will be crucial, as well as improvisation in terms of supply chain resilience and responsiveness to counter the COVID-19 impact of raw material shortages we are facing due to high dependence on China, as well as cost pressures on MSMEs as well as the industry due to sporadic supplies. So what it means is the supply chain focus will have an integration of other aspects, and the supply chains going further will have to be more resilient, responsive, and reconfigurable. All are talking about the COVID, how it started, the timelines, what are the industry perspectives, what is the focus on SCM. Very crucial factor what I want to introduce is about the supply chain finance. Let's have a look at it. With respect to working capital, there are measures brought in by the RBI as well as the Monetary Policy Committee. What it sums up is banks have been encouraged to lend with reduced repo rates or reverse repo rates, increasing liquidity into the market, more than 16 billion euro, wherein both SLR and CRR are cut. However, what we see is banks have preferred to deposit cash with RBI instead of lending, fair enough, as risk averse. But also, since the economic activity in itself is focused on more essential industries, what it means for the industry, key takeaways is cash conservation. This should be the top priority. However, as per the need, one should also be aware that affordable liquidity is available in the market to be leveraged. So that's the key message which comes out of from the finance perspective. And of course, from India as a destination or de-risking from China, as mentioned earlier, India has dependence on imports. We have seen that ranging from 10 to 40% across industries. However, India do exhibit manufacturing attractiveness with competence in certain processes such as casting, machining, forging, and fabrication, as well as some commodities or parts from rubbers and plastics, which can be considered in midterm. Although completely agreed upon about the short-term challenge of identifying and developing the supplier base to meet the requirements still remains a challenge. But what this means overall is that India does provide de-risking opportunities for local as well as local for global sourcing with established exports to quality conscious destinations such as USA, Germany, UK, and so on. Yeah. So what should I do, or what should be the measures I should say take in this particular time in terms of my supply chain? So to summarize, EAC recommends risk mitigation with 5 key measures: supply chain stability with strong supplier engagement, in inventory management, predict to stock function, logistics management with contactless material handling, workforce productivity with measures for protection, hygiene, and digitization to boost productivity as new normal, financial stability, optimizing cash flows, and exploring relief measures announced by government as relevance to the industry. Customer support, very important, utilizing virtual platforms, social media as again a new normal in this to support the customers, outreach to the customer, and also importantly, the short to mid-term strategic planning. Really, this will be developing multi-scenario. We are unfolding the future over here. So being prepared for the best case or the worst case going further, adapting business processes using digitization as a tool for the same. In a nutshell, building an agile yet resilient supply chain. So from a risk mitigation model, the preparedness is to build a resilient, responsive, and reconfigurable supply chain as readiness for market rebound. Finally, a few words about EAC. EAC Eurasia Consulting. We are a management consulting headquartered in Munich with branch offices in Munich, Shanghai, Mumbai, and Moscow, with focus on strategy and operational excellence, with experience and expertise across strategy as well as implementation topics. We are also knowledge partners for Embassy of India, Mittelstand, Make in India Mittelstand program, and have been supporting German companies for a market entry since 2015. With that, I close my presentation. Me and my colleague will be keen to answer your queries going further. But for now, I would like to hand over to Rhenus Logistics, Mr. Arya. Thank you.
Thank you, EAC. That was indeed a great insight into how the supply chain of some of the industries will function during these times. So before we move on to Mr. Arya, I would like to run a quick poll so that we can customize his presentation. He can customize his presentation to what the audience wants. You will see a question on your screen now. Please choose your option, and we start with Mr. Arya in about a minute or so. You can now select your response for the second poll that we have here online. We'll have it here for another 20 seconds for you to respond. So here are the results of the second question. Thanks for participating in the poll. I would now request Mr. Arya to proceed with his presentation.
Good afternoon, everyone. This is Vivek Arya from Rhenus Logistics. I would be talking about rebuilding the supply chain, and one of the reasons why we decided that we would be doing this presentation is because of a lot of ambiguities over the last days and weeks since we have had the lockdown. We at Rhenus, we tried to put the status update, and this status has been updated as of yesterday. So as we all know, the government announced the lockdown on the 3rd of May. Since then, on the 20th of April, some of the services were, sorry, can you see the screen?
Just a moment. Yeah. Mr. Arya, I will change the slide from my end.
Okay. Could you put it in presentation mode?
Yes, please.
Yeah, is that clear now? Yeah.
Yes.
So the status update on this is as of 22nd of April. And as we all know that the nationwide lockdown was announced on the 3rd of May. Since then, the government allowed a lot of other activities to happen since 20th of April. Some of them were movement of goods, whether inter or interstate, operations of the airport and related facilities at the air transport, cargo and relief and evacuation, operations at the seaports, ICDs and authorized CHS, all facilities in supply chain, mainly for essential goods. We had a lot of notifications which also mentioned that movements of essential and non-essential both would be allowed. But that was mainly from the perspective that the government wanted the trucks which were stranded with non-essential cargo to be delivered, and these trucks could be reutilized for movement of essential cargo. Cold storages and the warehouses were to be kept open, and there were a lot of relaxations for daily wage earners. Since the 20th and 23rd being today, some of the states have withdrawn the relaxations, namely Maharashtra, Delhi, Punjab, Telangana, and so on. The few relaxations which we saw on 20th, the government also announced that they would be very cautious and then decide for future course of action in a gradual manner. Government has defined a lot of hotspots, and these hotspots have been defined in the red, orange, and green zones. And as of 23rd of April, the government has actually clamped down on a lot of movements at the Nhava Sheva Bombay airport because they have the surrounding areas have been declared as red zones. So we see a lot of reduction in the manpower at both ports and the airports. Going forward, the big challenge is when will we see the laborers and the workers returning back to the ports, ICDs, and the CFS? It will take some time as fear and uncertainty will linger and for a long time. Maybe it'll take a few months for normalcy, or will this be the new normal? We have to wait and watch. Next slide, please. So what we have also done is we will speak in the next slides about all the activities in the supply chain, from air and ocean to domestic freight to customs clearance to warehousing. So the first one we have here is ocean. So the operations at the ports have been ongoing since the lockdown, which was lockdown 1.0 until date. The government has moved about 50,000 containers from the port to the CFS. What we have seen is that the containers did move from the port to the CFS. However, from the CFS, they have not moved further. And that has led to a huge congestion at the ports. Most of the shipping lines have already revised their sailing schedules, and they are contemplating to revise them further. The work at the CFS is extremely slow because of the low workforce, which is for the white collar, the blue collar, and also the customs officials not being there. Government announced 24/7 customs clearance, but in practically, because of less employees, the customs was not operating on 24/7. Priority was always given to the essential cargo. However, keeping the port decongestion in mind, the government is trying to move all the cargo out of the ports and the CFS to the warehouses. For example, the warehouses in Bhiwandi, Chennai have been allowed to operate to offload the import cargo. On the air freight, most of the business which is currently being undertaken is on freighter operations. As we all know, the passenger aircrafts are not moving anywhere. So most of the passenger aircrafts have been converted into freighters. So the movement of air freight in India is happening for import and export on freighters. The airports of Delhi, Chennai, Mumbai are all congested, and it is on the priority of the government to decongest the airports also. What we see is post-lockdown, there will be a huge surge in the demand. The capacities and the supply will remain low, and hence we will see the rates being very volatile in the next months due to the big gap in the demand and supply. Apart from the gap, we will also see an equipment imbalance. So finding the empty containers at the port of origin would be a big challenge. Lastly, we will see a huge pressure on our stressed infrastructure, whether it's seaports, airports, and CFS. What was to move over a period of 2 months, 3 months would be desired to be moved over a period of 1 month or shorter than 1 month. So we have some challenging times ahead. Next slide, please. So there would be all efforts to minimize the impacts on air and ocean movement. Most of the logistics companies will work on their core carriers, so will Rhenus. So we will work with our core carriers on the airlines. We have secured additional spaces and commitments from the carriers. We have regular movements happening on the key routes. We have our own air console programs running on charter aircrafts. And we are also organizing, as we talk, customs clearance at all major ports, airports. On the ocean side, again, the core carriers with the shipping lines, which are our core carriers, will play a major role. Export of shipments are happening as we talk, mainly for essential, which is food, packaging material, and so on. However, there are some products which are also moving, which are factory stuffed and have the e-sealing permissions. Rhenus can organize and is organizing door-to-door movement for all exempt cargo, and we are also organizing customs clearance at all major ports as we talk. Yeah, next slide, please. Customs clearance. The current status with the customs clearance is, as we know, the ports and the customs airports at the CFS, ICD were all exempted during the lockdown period. And as I said, they were to operate on 24/7. However, due to low workforce, right from the blue collar, white collar to the customs officers, the level of activity was very low. And it was the emphasis of the government to focus on clearance of the essential cargo only. During these last days, what we have seen, most of the transactions which were related to customs clearance were completed online without or minimum human interface. Even as we talk today, the presence of the custom officials at the ports is very low. In terms of Rhenus capabilities, all back offices activities such as control tower, documentations, customs filing, online processing is happening with minimum disruptions. So most of the people are doing the work from home. We are doing clearances at all the ports, major ports. We have all the necessary permissions for our people to move across the ports, to travel to the ports, etc. And so far, we have not seen any major change since the 21st of April. And whatever was scheduled to open on 21st April seems to have been postponed further because the areas have been identified as red zones. Post-lockdown, what we see is there will be a huge congestion at the ports and the airports, and it will take time for normalcy. There will be a surge in the volumes and the needs and expectations. Manpower will continue to be a challenge because a lot of people working in the ports area are coming from the nearby villages or their towns, and we have to see when they come back because of the fear. Rhenus is equipped to handle large volumes, so most of our employees working are from local regions, and we assume they will be back on time as most of them have been mobilized already. And the biggest positive outcome of the lockdown is that the E-Sanchit program, which the government had of digitization, has been launched, and we see that most of the clearances have been done without human interface. And we believe that in future that will be the new normal, and there will be the least human interface in the customs clearance process. Yeah. Next slide, please. On the domestic freight, there is a movement of inter and intrastate trucks. The driver and the cleaner is allowed to move irrespective of the cargo and nature of the cargo, whether essential or non-essential. The trucks, whether they are empty or returning after delivering a load, are also allowed to move. The government's intent to decongest the ports and the airports, seaports, so the customs have been authorized to allow movement of all trucks and the movement of drivers and the cleaners. So that part has been addressed quite well. There have been initial bottlenecks, but as we talk today, it's happening quite well. In terms of Rhenus capabilities, we have the possibility to deliver all essentials. We are doing it as we talk. We have the necessary permissions from various departments, from e-passes to all the requisite permissions. Even during these lockdown days, we have been able to provide our customers with real-time tracking and updates. Post-lockdown, we believe the biggest challenge would be drivers and the laborers. In India, we have two types of trucks. One is the owner-driven truck, and one is the driver, which is a professional driver. Most of the owner-driven trucks will continue to drive because the owner is dependent on the revenue for the meeting the expenditures of the truck. However, the migrant drivers would be a bit challenged when they come back to the duty. And if at all they come back to the duty, then going through medical tests and getting medical certificates would be a big challenge. So this challenge would remain for quite some time, even post the lockdown. Even addressing the needs of sanitization of the vehicles and the drivers and cleaners at the plants and the warehouse. We see a huge commercial impact due to the gap in the demand and supply. And as I said, the owner-driven trucks will continue to operate, but that's a fairly large chunk of the truck ownership. But yes, a lot is dependent on other professional drivers. Next slide, please. Yeah. So on the warehousing, the current status, so warehouses and the cold storages are allowed to operate. But the problem is that most of the warehouse locations or the logistics hubs have been termed as hotspots, whether it's Chennai, whether it's Bombay, Bhiwandi, or whether it's Delhi, and due to which the opening of the warehouses have been limited. However, for movement of essential cargo in and out of the warehouse, there have been a lot of relaxations provided. Along with that, the offloading of import cargo, the relaxations have been provided. Rhenus is currently operating the warehouses across all locations, across 28 locations. We are handling the offloading of import cargoes with restricted manpowers. We are managing our outbound operations mainly for essentials, which is pharma, food, medical equipment, etc. And we are also supporting our customers during these difficult times whether doing government projects or coal mining, hospitals, solar energy, and so on. Post-lockdown, what we foresee is that there will be a huge spike in the demand for storage because there is a huge cargo piling up at the ports, airports. So customers would like to stock their raw materials or finished goods. We also believe that there will be a surge in demand for spillovers and temporary storage. And we will also see that the companies, which we also saw in the poll, would like to revisit their inventory levels and also their sourcing strategy between domestic and international. All this will lead to a surge in the demand for warehousing space. Next slide, please. So during the lockdown period, we have made efforts to offer value-added services to our customers, operating round-the-clock services, facilitating the operations using the local permissions, whether from the police department or the collector and so on. We have managed all the work under the guidance of the government in terms of social distancing, etc. And we have been servicing the pharma, medical, agrochemical, pesticide industry. Post-lockdown, we have, as I said, we have capabilities and space all across the country. Most of the Rhenus laborers are local, so we believe that they will resume duty in the shortest possible time. We have a business continuity plans in place where we can work with social distancing and with multiple shifts to make sure that our customers do not suffer. Next slide, please. Post-lockdown, I think this is some of the key elements one needs to keep in mind. One, it will be a focus on rebuilding the supply chain. We believe that because of the huge commercial impact on the supply chain costs for logistics, the involvement of the senior management would be very crucial for quick decision making. The gaps between the current cost of operations versus future is very difficult to predict, but we believe that the gap would be substantially large, and people who would make quick decisions would be able to secure capacities. One will need a holistic view, more of an integrated view end to end, and there will be a lot of trade-offs which will need to be made during the course of business in the next months. All this is also dependent on the documentations of government directives. In the last few weeks, we saw a lot of notifications, and that was because a lot of them came out of more of a knee-jerk reaction from the government side, but I think they have to be well documented with proper guidelines. The drivers and the trucks would need the repairs and the dhabas open across the country. The passes and the movement of drivers have to be opened up without any restrictions. And I think the biggest outcome would be the digitization, and we should look forward and gear up ourselves to be able to work in a digitized manner. Next slide, please. These are some of the steps which we try to put in a wheel post-lockdown. We will be sharing these presentations, so I will probably talk about the headers in that. So right from managing the entry gate to communications and notice boards, the operations of the warehouse at the management level, canteen facilities, emergency response, transportation, training and awareness, sanitization and disinfection, disposal. So these are some of the key heads under which every company will have to draft their own business continuity plans, customizing it to their needs. Next slide, please. This is one of the case studies which I would like to show you. So Rhenus was appointed by the Ministry of Health and Family Welfare as well as Indian Red Cross Society. We have received charters of aircraft coming from all over the world. We have done the customs clearance of masks, ventilators, goggles, gloves, temperature meters, protective suits, PPE equipments. We have moved them after clearance to our warehouse. After receiving at our warehouse, we have segregated, stickered them, and we have distributed pan-India. In the last few weeks, we have handled 52,000 boxes with over 52 million pieces. This has been a very successful assignment, and as we talk, this is an ongoing assignment. Next slide, please. So for us, employee safety is in the forefront. And as I said, that this will be the new normal of having a business continuity plan for all business sites, offices, and warehouses. We will have to monitor our regularly our hygiene standards. We have constituted a special task force which consists of the leadership team of Rhenus. So my advice would be that most of the companies need to have a task force with the senior management. Keeping employees informed during these days is very important. We are conducting regular fumigation, fogging, desanitization of all our facilities, and all work is being undertaken as per the guidelines of WHO and the law of the land. Next slide, please. So this is the last slide, and as I said, Rhenus is equipped to offer various supply chain customized solutions. On the right side, you see the sticker here. So we understand from the government that they had a program of decongestion of Delhi airport because of huge surge in imports over the last weeks. So we made a special offer, as we have a very large 35,000 square meter facility in Delhi region, to move cargo, clear the cargo in Delhi airport, move it to our warehouse, and store for our customers at a discounted price during these days. Yeah. So that's the last slide from my side. Next slide, please. Thank you very much. Over to you, Sana.
Good afternoon, everyone. This is Monaz Desai Tancher. Now we will start with our Q&A session. We have got an overwhelming response, so we promise to respond to everybody's question via email, but we have capacity for a few questions. So first question goes to the EAC team here. The question is, how much of volume or value shift in production one sees due from China to India? Vineet, Unmesh, can someone take this?
Yeah, thanks, Manas, for the question. It's a very interesting question. I must say it's very difficult to predict on the volume or exact volumes or value shift because it depends on a lot of factors. However, we already see initiatives for localization across industries, like what we presented from pharma, chemical to food packaging, as well as automotive, what Vineet also presented. So that's a major driver. So that will drive the localization. Also, some of the value chains which are currently non-existent in India will also be targeted. To give examples like APIs in pharma, where the government has keen interest for localization, intermediates in chemicals. There are certain process categories like castings and forgings. And finally, to answer this question, whether this will be cost effective, so that is the third driver, wherein there is going to be a shift in the focus in supply chain from merely being focused on quality cost delivery to being more agile, resilient, and responsive in the supply chain. So this is what will certainly drive the volumes from China to India. Exact measures will be very difficult to predict from my side.
Thank you, Unmesh.
Just a quick point from my side, maybe.
Sure.
Let's break it down into terms, maybe, and in the midterm, the potential shift will definitely align with where we are strong. When we talk about castings or precision machining or forging and stamp components, yeah, I mean, really engineered goods. This would definitely become a very proactive initiative from the OEM side and as well as supply side. So it's going to move not just from the policies push, but more towards customers' demand perspective. And in the long term, like Unmesh mentioned, new potential opportunities will definitely lead to dealing from import perspective. What Unmesh spoke about APIs and we'll focus on pharma value chain. This definitely would come in the let's say mid to longer term as well.
Okay, thank you so much, Vineet. Next question is for Mr. Arya. Will the inter and intra-state goods movement be allowed from red zone?
Yeah, so as of now, the government is allowing movement of goods with one driver and cleaner, even if it's within the red zone.
Okay.
There are no clear guidelines because some of the red zones do allow and some do not allow. So as I said, there is a little out of sync in these respect because of situation being very dynamic and volatile at the moment. So if there is somebody who needs a specific answer from where point A to B, maybe you can get in touch with me or my team and we could probably guide them.
Okay, and there's another question that is also similar to this. We are in export business and export our goods to Germany, Russia, and South Africa. I want to understand, in all three countries, lockdown periods are different. How can we get help from Rhenus to maintain our supply chain? Require some tips.
Okay, thank you. So Rhenus has offices in all the three locations, which is Germany, Turkey, and South Africa. And I always advise our customers that if they have a regular movement of products and they want to maintain just-in-time, just-in-sequence deliveries to their end customers, maybe they should use the overseas warehousing options. Today, the Reserve Bank of India allows you to stock your cargo in overseas centers and deliver as per the consumption pattern of your customers. So Rhenus can definitely provide freight services, pick up from their factory, moving to the destination countries, storing it for them in the destination countries in our warehouses, and doing just-in-time, just-in-sequence deliveries. So whosoever this question comes to, I think could get in touch with us, and we are happy to give them a customized solution around this.
Thank you, Mr. Arya. We'll definitely connect you both. Next question for EAC. There seem to be some new regulations for custom clearance, example, fumigation certificates. Where can I find information on how to get these certificates and how long will they be demanded?
Well, I think, and from a SOP perspective, mandated requirements, the Ministry of Home Affairs has come out with specific SOPs, and these include offices as well as production units. The fumigation certificates, and this is something we'll have to look. Maybe Mr. Arya would have an idea, but this is something that we'll have to look into.
Yeah, so sorry if I may just step in here, Vivek here. There are no clear notifications in regard to the new regulations on fumigations. The problem is that the people who are handling the cargo at the ports and the CFS are just scared. There is a fear element because it comes from China. So they are trying to disinfect the cargo and put the cargo in 24 hours in quarantine before it is touched by the laborers. So we have to wait for another few weeks. Maybe we have more clear written guidelines on that one.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Arya. Next for EAC, those who all are dependent on more than 80% of raw material as imports, how can one plan optimization of inventory?
Yeah, so it's very interesting question again. However, the solution, if I think about it, can be divided again in short and mid-term. So for 80% raw material imports, I would place short-term strategy to secure supplies from alternate sources, from resourcing or alternate sourcing. I don't know which raw materials are we referring to here, but if there are any local value chains over here to secure these supplies, single supplier contracts from non-hotspot regions and so on. But the mid to long-term focus really has to be a shift from, say, inventory optimization to inventory securitization. Going further, it is going to be a new normal, as we heard from all the speakers today. So it's very mandatory now to all the industry to do a scenario planning, and the scenarios or the new normals is something which is unknown to most of the industries. So the point which I'm driving is to do a scenario planning and accordingly maintain buffers of the inventory depending on the various demand environments or demand situations going further.
Thank you.
You
Thank you so much.
You can, Manoj, just a quick point again. Maybe
Sure, Vineet.
it would be advisable to really break down the your materials that's in the inventory. If there's an exposure of 80% on imports, we would advise you prioritize the levels which can be really localized, which would therefore bring your demand planning in a short. The rest of the BOM, let's say, the critical parts of the BOM, if it's not localizable in the short term, what we would not want to focus on in the midterm is how you can develop local suppliers, because development of suppliers also takes time, especially if it's a critical component. So that would be how you would want to prioritize shifting suppliers as well.
Thanks. Thank you so much, Vineet. And our last question for today, that's for Mr. Arya. We have an urgent export order from Turkey, Europe, and China. How can we proceed in today's current scenario?
Yeah, so the vessels are sailing, and as I said, also the aircraft charters are moving. So if they have the business to be moved, they have to get in touch with their service provider, or if they like, we can also help them and organize the movement from any of these locations into India. Logistics in India is more clamped up than most of the countries overseas, which are also under lockdown. In countries like Germany or in South Africa, most of the logistics activities are under essential. It does not matter what product you're carrying. In India, it's a lot more controlled, and I would say it is also to do with the discipline levels amongst us. So yeah, so the movement is possible. It's only getting in touch with the right service provider to handle the movement.
This has actually just come in, Mr. Arya. What is the waiting period for urgent chartered planes? If you could just throw the light and actually make it the last question.
Yeah, so just to add, so there are two different kinds of charters. One are the original freighter aircrafts, which have carrying capacities ranging from 20-30 tons all the way up to 100 tons. And second we have is the passenger aircrafts, which are converted into freighters. So there is a good amount of supply available in terms of the aircrafts. It can happen within a short period of 3 to 4 days, could even take longer as a week or 7 to 8 days. It depends on which kind of aircraft one is looking for, whether it's normal cargo, palletized cargo, boxes, or over-dimensional cargo. So there are a lot of ifs and buts and permutation combinations. But yes, to give you an answer, it could be anywhere between 48 hours to somewhere about 7 to 8 days.
All right. Thank you so much for answering those questions. Mr. Doibert, to you now for our vote of thanks. We are just at 4 o'clock.
Okay, thank you. I would like to thank you all personally for registering and attending today's seminar. Thank you also for your patience. As expected, when working from home and IT is involved, there were a few glitches. We noticed that, but I'm sure we will improve from here on. A big thank you also to our knowledge partners, Vivek from Rhenus and Umesh and Vineet from EAC, on giving us useful overview on the logistics landscape and for giving us valuable tips and insights into managing the supply chain during these difficult times. In particular, also for the status report on activities at warehouses and ports and the outlook post-lockdown. Last but not least, I would like to thank the team at IGCC, in particular Sana and Monas, as well as Leah from the Hamburg representation, Mumbai, for helping organize this webinar. As always, a recorded version of our webinar will be available on our website, and will also be sent to whoever has registered. Also, all the questions that you have posted will be answered by us through email and the knowledge partners, and we will also send the presentations to you. Our next webinar will be coming next Tuesday and will address the topic of how industry can support workers and employees in times of crisis. Please regularly check our website for relevant information. Dear members and partners, you know you can talk to us anytime. We will continue to listen to you, and we look forward to your valuable feedback on today's session as well, and on any advice you have for us. Please stay strong, remain positive, and be patient. It is now the time to focus ourselves for the moment when we will be able to grow again. Thank you and bye-bye.
Thank you.